Okay, so let's get right to the point here. I'm going to sum up this book for you in a sentence, and then if you'd like, you can go ahead and be on your way. So here it is. People don't have ideas. Ideas have people. That was Carl Jung who said that. And what he was talking about was how certain ideas can grip you and get a hold on you, and they start to take control of your personality and change who you are. But the irony is, when he said that, Jung himself was under the grip of an idea that belonged to someone else who wrote the same words almost 100 years before he did. And that person was Dostoevsky in his book, Demons. There isn't a better book that I know of that gets to the foundations of the problems and the breakdowns that we're seeing in our culture right now. I finished it recently, and that's what I'm going to get into in this video, is how Dostoevsky went about investigating the origin of political ideas, how they start to take root, evolve over time, and take on a life of their own, and ultimately how they shape the world as we know it. Now, if you decide that you want to read this book, you need to know what you're getting yourself into. It's commonly viewed as a sort of tangent that isn't central to Dostoevsky's more well-known books like Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Brothers Karamazov, but it's an essential part of his canon because of how prolific the book is at diagnosing a problem in Russia that wouldn't actually come to fruition for another 50 years after it was written. It's actually the same problem that's taking hold in America today. And the problem is, if a culture rejects the old hierarchies and the old power structures, what's going to take their place? If an idea that's propping up a civilization dies, another one is going to come in to fill that void. But the thing is, ideas in theory are very different from ideas put into practice. And the idea that was taking hold of Russia in the late 1800s was totalitarian socialism. Now, where did that idea come from exactly? Where do most of the ideas that animate a culture come from? They used to come from religious values, but Dostoevsky, being the great observer of human nature that he was, he saw that that was all beginning to change. Rationality had usurped belief in divine authority, and because of that, the intellectual class kind of stepped in to fill the void as the new purveyors of truth. That's why he starts the book off the way that he does. He actually writes chapter 1. The title says, instead of an introduction, here's a few details from the biography of Stepan Trofimovich. Stepan is a Russian scholar. He's a philosopher. He's a lecturer. And throughout his life, he goes about establishing himself as this well-known literary figure in Russia. But he never actually produces anything. He has no body of work to show for himself. He's a symbol of progress and he's a symbol of enlightenment, but there's no substance there. And that was the flaw that Dostoevsky identified in this new dynamic of how modern societies were being constructed around theories developed by the intellectual class. And it has to do with feedback mechanisms that exist or the lack of those mechanisms in a given line of work. For example, if you build a house, the house is physical evidence of the quality of your work, right? You can see it, you can touch it, it's real. If the house isn't built well, it's going to fall apart. Even if it looks great on the outside, pretty soon, if all the foundations weren't laid properly and you didn't see to all of the little detailed intricacies that make a structure secure, it's going to degrade. And the hard sciences and technology are consistent with this. People who work in those spaces have physical products of work to show. Their theories can quickly be put through a rigorous test, and the results aren't subjective. On the other hand, though, you have another branch of academia that deals in the realm of concepts and ideas. They don't make anything that's real or tangible. They don't produce value that can be immediately traded in the market. Words and ideas are their medium, and they have to synthesize new ideas, new theories, new problems in order to continually justify their existence. These theories can't quickly be put to test and proven right or wrong. they aren't operating in the realm of physics. So the constraints and the feedback mechanisms that usually guide scientific exploration are missing. And that delimiting factor opens up an opportunity where facts can be modified and hybridized to synthesize something that appears like a new discovery for the gain of a researcher who stands to profit from the creation of that new niche within which they can thrive. And this unaccountable intellectual class, it turns out they don't cook the books. They actually write the books, and they are the invisible hand that's steering the ship of culture. Dostoevsky identified that academia is the origin of all social revolution. So why does that matter? Why can't we just accept that, there's always going to be some smart, creative, kind of crazy people in universities and the C-suites that are going to have their eccentric views, but we should just leave them alone because they're not bothering anybody, right? Everything else works relatively well. We have doctors, we have lawyers, we have plumbers, electricians. Everything else is running smoothly. No big deal, right? Well, Dostoevsky noticed that ideas have a tendency to permeate culture and gradually seep down into all the different stratas of a society. Initially, they germinate at the top, and you can think of that like a seed that's planted in the ground. And over time, as that seed begins to take root, it slowly grows and extends itself into the lower and the deeper levels of the soil, occupying more and more space over time. But the fact that ideas spread throughout a culture isn't really the key insight here. What this book explores is what happens to ideas over time as they're passed on from one generation to the next. See, Stepan has a son named Peter, who he's estranged from, by the way. All of his lofty ideals about compassion and equality aren't actually realized in his own relationship with his son. But, his son and his compatriots are growing up in a time where these new ideas of socialism and revolution are new and they're exciting. They're actually watching the adults carefully, like all children do. And they're creating a model of the world based on what their parents teach them through their actions. And what they're learning is any accumulation of wealth or power was got by unfair means. That's really the gist. But what the older generation doesn't take into account is that everyone might agree on the problem, but every generation is going to have a very different view on how to solve that problem. Young people, they don't have as many constraints and they don't feel as many obligations to the traditions of culture. There's a strong drive in them to change the world. And what starts out as a call for equality quickly evolves into a call for violence and action to destroy the system that holds power up by any means necessary. That was Dostoevsky's main insight in the book. The seed of an idea can be noble, but the true nature of ideas have to be judged on the fruits that they produce. And it's not too long before Peter establishes himself as a leader of this revolution. But the attempt to dismantle the hierarchy by force and violence leads to the development of a new hierarchy within the revolution that's upheld by force and violence. The checks and the balances on power don't exist anymore. They've been destroyed. And Peter becomes something like a mob boss who actually ends up taking a hit out on one of his own men who he thinks is going to defect. Spoiler alert, by the way. Sorry. But despite this utopian vision that's supposed to be holding everyone together, behind closed doors, everyone is living in this constant state of fear. It seems like no one can be trusted. Everybody at every level is trying to implicate someone else so that they can prove their own loyalty to the cause. There's a brilliant line where Peter actually admits he's bragging about the influence that he has in the group. And he says, if I just yell at them that they're not liberal enough, I could get them all to walk through fire. Does that sound familiar? Because it should. I mean, that's exactly what's happening now with cancel culture, black squares on Instagram, vaccine mandates, the fear of lacking sufficient evidence to prove your loyalty to the party is the driving motivation in the novel and in our culture today. And that is what Demons is all about. Demons are the ideas that animate human beings to resent, to hate, to seek to dominate by any means necessary, and ultimately to destroy. But Dostoevsky, as he often does, offers us an olive branch at the end of the book. He identifies that there's a singular force that he believed had the power to oppose these demons that seek to destroy. And that force is creation. The belief that life is good and that life is worth living, and finding evidence in that claim in the existential experience of the birth of a child, looking up from this nihilistic tendency to navel gaze and coming to terms with the fact that over time, cultures that value life thrive, and ones that don't inevitably create unbounded suffering. It's a lesson that we're still learning today, and I think it's one that everybody should experience, or at least should get a taste of by reading this book. So that is Dostoevsky's Demons. See y'all next time.